Well, good morning again. How are we doing this morning? We'll get there. We are starting a brand new series today called Scandalous, which is kind of an interesting title, I know, for a series. And it's really explaining Christianity's craziest ideas. Because Christianity, even though we may be used to it because we have been around it or been a part of it for much, if not all of our lives, at the beginning, Christianity was a scandalous idea. Most of the ideas that Christians brought to the table, people around them thought was crazy. And so the early church faced a lot of ridicule and being made fun of and persecution because what they brought to the table was not the way people did things. The values of the world that they had were different than the values that Christianity brought, and it seemed strange. It seemed scandalous. And because people then are not all that different than they all are now, they had places then that people would gather and talk. Right? They had water coolers to come around. They had buildings that they would go to. They had places where they would talk and gossip and whisper, just like we experience in our lives today. There are places in the community. There are places in your work. There are places at the ball field where people gather around and they talk and they whisper and they say, hey, that seems weird. That seems normal. Anything that we do that doesn't look like everybody else, at a minimum, gets some whispers. It potentially gathers a crowd of people watching to see. And so they were just like today. There are some social norms. There are some expectations on all people. And social norms change, don't they? Culture changes what's expected, what's accepted, what's normal. You see that over the last 20 years. Social norms have changed. And as followers of Jesus, we are expected to stay in our lane. And as Christians back in that day, as it was new, they were expected to do the same thing. In fact, it was so new, it wasn't even called Christianity. It was called the Way. That's what they were first called. The followers of Jesus were part of the way. It's not till Acts 11:26 that the word Christian is introduced. In Acts 11:26, it says, for a whole year they met with the church and taught large numbers. The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. So Christianity is a new thing, following Jesus. Now, God is not new. God has always existed, but somebody devoting themselves to the person of Jesus, being a Christian, was a new thing. And so these practices, these attitudes of Christians are new. They're not normal. They're not part of the way community had done things before. And you've experienced this, right? If you work somewhere for any period of time, a new person comes into the office, comes into the factory, comes into the job, and they don't know any better. You've been there a long time. You know just, hey, this is how we do things here. But they come in and they got these bright ideas or these new solutions, and they start doing things different. And what do we all do? We roll our eyes. Oh, that's the new guy, right? That's not how we do things around here, right? We operate the same way too. We notice when somebody is doing something different than everyone else. And that's what's happening in the story that we're going to look at today. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. This is a letter that Paul wrote to a church in Corinth. It'll be on the screens as well, but that's where we're going to be today. And I just want to caution you as we kick off this series, Scandalous, we're going to look at ideas that were new to Christianity that I think all of us will rally around. A lot of us will rally around and say, yeah, like I believe that. I'm supportive of that. But the one we're kicking it off with today, I think might be the most challenging one of all of them. It may kind of cause us to ruffle our feathers a little bit. I know it does for me as well. This causes me to push back a little bit. But I just want to encourage you to not push back, to listen with an open heart, with an open mind at what Jesus says about the topic we're going to talk about today. Because I don't want you to just go through life doing things unintentionally. I want you to do them on purpose. And our purpose should always be to help people become disciples of Jesus. And so this letter written to the Corinthians, to this church in Corinth. Corinth was a very prominent city at this time. It was a city of excess. It was a city of pleasure. It was a city of business and trade. And it was famous for its festivals, and it was famous for its sporting events. And so people were always coming and going. This is a place that people would come and vacation in and then leave. This was a sight to see. And so people were always in and out of the city, and there's a big city at the time. And so Paul starts a church on one of his missionary journeys in Corinth. It's a hub. And so Paul says, hey, we need a church here that is teaching who Jesus is. And he starts a church there. And he stayed for about a year and a half to get the church going, and then he leaves. And the church is growing. People are giving their lives to Jesus. They are getting saved. But then after Paul leaves, the church kind of begins to resemble a school classroom with a substitute teacher. You know what I'm talking about? When I was waiting to get in the Air Force, I needed to work, and so I filled out the paperwork to substitute teach in Kentucky, back where I'm from. And they called me one day and said, we need a sub for third grade for half a day. And I thought, this is easy money. And so I went to the school, and here I am with these third graders, and I just thought this was going to be a piece of cake. I will tell you what you should do. You will say, yes, sir, and sit down and do what you're supposed to do, and it will just be amazing. But I have to tell you that I have fought in 2 wars. I've been attacked by rockets. I've spent weeks just living in the desert. I lived through 2 tornadoes. I've been stranded on a boat in the middle of the river, and none of them compare to substitute teaching half a day in 3rd grade. Right? It was insane. Gangs started forming. They were plotting to take me out. I lost all control. Every kid that needed to go to the bathroom and I didn't let go because I thought they were lying to me really did have to go. And they used the bathroom in the class. And every kid that I thought, I think they're telling me the truth, I just lost them in the hallway somewhere. They didn't need to go to the bathroom. Everything I did that day was wrong. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. In fact, that year, I kept getting calls from the Hopkins County Board of Education. Hey, we see that you're on our substitute role. Would you like to come sub? And I would tell them every time, lose this phone number. This will never happen again. It's never going to happen. I don't care if every teacher in the county is out sick. I'm not the guy for this job. It's a little bit of what happens here. Paul leaves, and the church begins to have some problems. There's some crazy things that are happening inside the church, and also with how the people inside the church are dealing with those outside the church who don't know Jesus. And so Paul writes them a letter, and he does address how they're dealing with people inside the church. He talks about it. You can read that in his letters to the church in Corinth. But then he talks about what we're going to look at today, how to deal with people outside of the church who are not following Jesus. Because remember, this is a pretty wild city. This is a pretty crazy city. This is a city that exceeds maybe the cultural norms. Maybe they're the ones pushing the envelope for society and what's acceptable. And so he writes this letter and gives some great advice that I think is applicable to us today. Here's what he says in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 12. For what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? Don't you judge those who are inside? God judges outsiders. And so Paul asks a question that I think we often stop asking. What business is it of mine to judge people outside of the church? In other words, what he's asking is, hey, what business is it of ours to judge people who have never given their life to Jesus? What business is it of ours to judge people who have never given their life to Jesus? Here's the issue. Hopefully you'll write this down, remember this. It's always easier to talk about someone's problem than it is to get involved in their life. That's what he ultimately ends up pointing to. That it's always easier for us to judge, for us to talk about somebody else's problem than it is for us to get involved in their life. And that's so true for us. In fact, instead of getting involved when we see someone who is not a follower of Jesus doing something wrong, we usually respond in a few different ways. We're often tempted to respond in a few different ways, all of which are not good ways. They are bad ways. So I just want to challenge our thinking today on how we respond to people who have not given their lives to Jesus. Please hear me. This is not for your brothers and sisters who are following Jesus. This is for people who have said, no, I don't believe that. I don't follow Jesus. I have not signed up to live my life this way. I just want to give us a few things to think about that are bad ways for us to respond to them. Here's the first one, is for us to condemn them. That's a bad way for us to respond. Now, please hear me. I know some of you right now are getting a little bit angry at me. But please hear me. I am not saying that we do not stand for what is right and what is biblical. We are always called to stand for what is right and what is biblical. I'm not saying that we should ignore anything and everything that is happening around us if it's happening from people who aren't followers of Jesus. I'm not saying that. So if you leave here today and say, hey, we shouldn't get involved anywhere if they're not following Jesus, that is not what I'm saying. I think you'll see that in a minute. I'm saying if we're going to respond, and at times we should, at times we absolutely should respond, we want to do it the right way. And here's what I know. It's not our job to condemn anyone. It's not. It's not ours as individuals. It's not ours as a church. And it's especially not our job to condemn anyone from a place of anger. Right? You've seen this. Maybe you've been a part of this. We're all guilty of this, I think, at some place in our lives where we are angry by something we see. And so we tell them they're doing wrong and that they're ruining their lives. And we say things like this: until you stop doing whatever it is, fill in the blank, your life is never going to be better. Right? And this comes in all forms. Two of the most popular forms that you see on the news, you see on social media of telling people they're wrong is the people who go to events with signs and posters and banners proclaiming what is true and why you were wrong for not doing that, right? You've probably seen that before. I've been at events before where you see the person on the side of the road shouting at you how much Jesus loves you. And I'm like, I'm not sure by your temperament right now that this is a real thing, okay? Like, you seem really angry about how much Jesus loves me. And if I wasn't already a follower of him, I don't think I would walk over to you and engage in a conversation about this. Another one, maybe a more popular one today, is posting on social media how someone or some group is so terrible, how wrong they are, right? And what's going to happen because they're so bad, how some organization is so horrible. These are ways of condemning. And I have to be honest with you, while it feels good, probably, both of these are lazy and unproductive. Because nobody's reading that sign and going, you know what? My entire life, I've been anti whatever he's saying I should be for. But his penmanship's really good. That's a creative sign. I think I'm changing my mind. Right? Let me tell you something. This is a secret. This is going to hurt some of your feelings. Nobody has ever read your social media post and changed their opinion. It's true. I know this is very, very shocking to all of us. You know why I know that's true? Because you know who's reading your social media posts? Only people who agree with you. Right? Lots of people are reading it going, yeah, that's right, you tell them. But the people that need to be told are not the ones reading it. Our social media, our signs, our condemnation of people is not changing them. Besides, that's not how Jesus did it, right? We should look to Jesus. That's not how he did it. In fact, the only group we really see him shouting at is, you know who? Us. It's the religious people, more specifically me's. It's the guys leading in the temple that he goes to and is angry with for how they are doing that. To everyone else, what did he do? He said, hey, Matthew, I know you're a tax collector. Tax collector means nothing to us. It's the greatest outcast of society at that time. His own people didn't want him. The people he was collecting money from thought he was a traitor and a scum. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. And Jesus said, hey, Matthew, there's something better. Come spend some time with me. In fact, hey, I'm going to go to this tax collector's house. You can bring some of your friends over, your tax collector buddies, and I'm going to spend some time with you. Right? Jesus goes to the well. There's a woman there who's been married multiple times. She's living with somebody now who's not her husband. Nobody wants anything to do with her. She's at the well at that time of day specifically because nobody will go around her. So she goes when nobody else is going to the well so she can be alone and not ridiculed. And Jesus sits down and starts a conversation, which just him talking to her was a scandal. Like, it would have made the town newspaper. Can you believe this happened? But he not only talks to her, he invites her into a relationship with him. He sits and drinks water. Jesus understood that condemnation alone makes a point, but it doesn't lead to change. It makes a point. Like it makes a point. Hey, I get your point. I see what you're saying, but it doesn't lead a change. Telling them they are wrong is a world away from guiding them to change. And anyone who's ever been to a sporting event or watched your husband or wife, maybe, I don't know, at a sporting event, knows what I'm talking about. And here's why we know that making a point doesn't lead to change. Because you have been on the sideline before, and that referee has made a call that was not right. And we began to do what? Yell. We are making our point collectively. Sometimes thousands together are making their point. And we're making it loud and clear. And to this day, I've yet to see a referee turn around and go, you guys are right. Point well taken. Right? We make our point sometimes without changing anything. And so we often condemn. And we shouldn't. That's not the way to go about it. And some are even lazier than condemning. I'm guilty of this one. I don't go to the rally to condemn. I don't have time to do that. But I'm probably more likely to this one. I'm probably more likely to sit around and criticize them. Right? I'm just going to talk bad about how they're living their life, how they're doing things. And we say things to our spiritual friends. Can you believe what she did? Right? Sometimes we even try to cloak it in religion, and we say it like this: hey, we really need to pray for. And we say them because they're really going through some stuff, right? We haven't prayed for them. We don't intend to pray for them. We just want to put that little tag on it so we can talk about it and feel better about talking about it, right? It's even lazier than the guy at the sign holding the rally, and it's just as unproductive. This is what the Pharisees did, the religious leaders of the New Testament. They sat around talking about what others were doing. They sat around saying, I'm glad I'm not like them. They sat around saying, do you see them? Do you see him? Do you see her? They talked about it. But here's the thing about criticism. Criticism of others will always lead to pride in our own life and toleration of our own sin. When we primarily look at those who aren't followers of Jesus and we criticize, it is always going to lead to pride in our life and a toleration of our own sin. And here's why. Is because we can always find someone who is doing something worse than us. Right? You can always find somebody who's doing something worse than you. I know somebody who is a worse husband. You know somebody who cheats more on their taxes. We know somebody who has a bigger temper problem. We know somebody who is watching and saying worse things than we watch and say. And so we know a worse person to criticize, all while ignoring sin in our own life. Criticism is no better way than condemnation. But I think maybe there's another place. Maybe this is the one that we most often find ourselves in. Maybe we're not the condemning crowd. Maybe we're not even the really criticizing crowd. But maybe this is the one that we find ourselves in, and that's staying away from them. From those who don't know Jesus, we just choose to stay away from them. We just work with them. Our kids play a sport with them. We see them, but we just leave them alone. We stay very surface level in our conversations and interaction because God forbid they share something deeply with us and think we're friends. That's a problem if we get too deep into conversation. Even worse, what if my friends who do love Jesus seeing me hanging out or being friends with somebody who doesn't love Jesus? What will they think of me? And we're constantly giving them the wrong message of this: until you become like us, then you can't be around us. Some of you, maybe that's your story. Maybe you experienced that at some point before your life with Jesus. This ostracization of you because you weren't like them. And so we say, while you're sinful, stay over there, get cleaned up, and then come over here, then we can talk. But not before, because we need to make sure everyone knows that we're against what you're doing. Like if we spend too much time together, people may begin to question whether we believe or accept what you are doing in your life. And so we worry about guilt by association. What are others going to think? They're going to think that what they are doing is okay. But why? Why do we worry about guilt by association? Where in Scripture does it tell us to do that? Absolutely. We prayed for our kids this morning. Sure, there is wisdom in choosing our friends. There is wisdom in choosing who we allow to influence us. There's a lot of wisdom in that. It's one of the things I try to drive home with my kids more than anything else is who they choose to be their friends. But that isn't meant to be at the exclusion of everyone else. And we're thankful for that, because if God said, hey, you have to be cleaned up before you can come to me, we would all be hopeless. That's not what he said to us. That's not the gospel. The gospel is not get yourself together, get right, get your problem solved, and then come to Jesus. It's come to Jesus as you are, and he will clean you up. That's why we say there is hope in the gospel, because it's the gospel that is the power to save and to change you. It is not your ability. It is not my ability. That's the good news, that we can come to Jesus with all of our pain, our problem, our sin, our hang-ups, everything we have to Jesus, and he will change us. And when we look at the life of Jesus, he is constantly building relationships with people that he wanted to change, that he wanted to influence. Jesus was not, listen to this, Jesus was not concerned about guilt by association. He wasn't. He was not concerned about guilt by association, but also he did not let his associations cause him to become guilty. Right? He was the influencer. You don't read the story of Jesus being around a crowd who was kind of a rough crowd and needed Jesus, but then Jesus, took a wrong turn there. Right? He was not guilty. He was not concerned about guilt by association, but he also did not allow his associations to cause him to be guilty. He modeled this so well for us. In fact, so well, what did they say Jesus' reputation was? In Matthew 11, it says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a what? Friend of tax collectors and sinners. Like, they are pointing out, hey, Jesus, that guy, he's a friend of sinners. That's how they were talking about him. He was a friend to those who needed him most. He was not saying it is okay for them to sin. In fact, he always told them to stop. He always told them there's a better way, but he did this through relationships. And he knew, and we know, that investing in lives is difficult. It's a challenge to invest in lives. And some people, it's more than a challenge than others, isn't it? Don't point to anybody in here, okay? But it's a challenge. But we can't pick and choose the area of Jesus' life that we're going to follow. And he clearly walked towards the messes. And when we do stay away from people without Jesus, they are left to search for hope on their own. In leaving them alone, too often we say that they need to hit rock bottom. And then they'll realize that they need to make a change. Have you heard that before? I've heard that before. I think I've said that before. You know what they need? They just got to hit rock bottom. And then they're going to change. But the more I think about that, the dumber I think that is for me to say. Here's why I think that. I gave my son a pocket knife last year. He was 8 years old. Ace. Many of you know Ace. And you're probably thinking, Michael, this is a horrible idea. And you're not wrong. But I gave him a pocket knife. Now, I gave him that pocket knife, and I could have said, hey, son, here's a knife. It's sharp. Be careful. And that been the end of it. And I could have thought, you know how he's best going to learn about the dangers of this knife? Cut his finger off, right? When he stabs that thing in his hand because he's trying to open some package that he doesn't really need to use a knife for, but he just wants to, he's going to go, oh, man, Dad was right. There's a lot of blood here. This knife is really sharp. Or, that's an option, okay? Or maybe a better way would be to teach him about the knife and the dangers of it, why he needs to be careful with it, how to properly handle it. Helping someone work through something is always more involved than letting them figure it out for themselves. It always takes more time. It always takes more conversation. Listen, it's always going to hurt you more. Because just when you think I'm getting through, something's going to happen, and you're going to think, what have I been doing for the last year? It always costs more. But it's so much better than just saying, well, when they hit rock bottom, then they'll be ready. One requires much more of us than the others. Rock bottom is not a good option. And here's the other way I know this is true. And I think you would know this is true. Is because would that be the approach you want someone to take with you in your life? If they see you making poor decisions in your life and they've maybe walked that road before, they know, hey, this is how this is going to end in your marriage. This is how this is going to end in your finances. This is going to how this is going to end in your job and your parenting. You know what? I'm just going to let you hit rock bottom and figure it out. You'd be so mad if they told you that was their strategy for you. You'd be like, hey, here's a better option. Warn me. Tell me. Talk to me, right? We know that rock bottom is a bad option. And so condemning, criticizing, and certainly staying away from are not good options. And hopefully all of you who are a follower of Jesus know someone who isn't. And if you do, we have to then ask the question, how should we interact with them? And Jesus speaks of this often in his time on earth. I want us to look at a couple things he says about dealing with people who aren't followers of Jesus. There's a time in Matthew chapter 5, there's a crowd of people following him, and they had sat down, and Jesus sat down with them, and he starts kind of a list of teachings. And one of the first things he says in Matthew 5, verse 14, he says this, we read this a few weeks ago. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine for others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Now, in the original language, in the Greek, of the world there means in the church, right? You are the light in the church. I'm just kidding. It doesn't mean that at all, right? We live it out that way, but that's not what it means. No, it means you are the light to shine on the world and what they are doing wrong. I'm also kidding again. It doesn't mean that, okay? That's not what it means, but we often do that. That's the kind of light we are. No, we're thinking of what it says when it says light on a hill all wrong. We need to think of this light correctly. This is more of not of a flashlight that is there to help me see, right? A flashlight's there to help me see what I'm looking for. It's for me to point things out. But this is a light so that others can see. This is more like a police car's lights. They don't flash their lights so that they can see the situation better, right? They flash their lights, why? So you can see them. So you can see them. That's why they have lights on their car. They don't have the lights on the top of their car to help them see the situation any more clearly. It's not as though if they are evaluating a situation in a shade of blue, they see it better. It's so that you down the road go, hey, something's going on up there. It draws your attention. That's why this city on a hill is not hidden. It's on a hill that people far off can look to and see a light and say, hey, there's something happening there. So we're a light on a hill. What do we do next? People see us, and that's when we get to point out all the things they're doing wrong, right? Once we get their attention, hey, up here on the hill, now they're looking, they're coming. Now we can tell them. No, of course not. No, they see us living differently. They see us being honest in our business. They see our marriage looking different than their marriage. They see us handling our money differently. They see us parenting and having goals for our kids that are different. They see our work ethic and our priorities that are different. They see that you care about them and their problems and their pains and not just what you can get from them. They see all these different things. And we do this because our lives shine a light not to put the spotlight on ourselves, but to put the spotlight on Jesus. This takes getting involved. This is more difficult. This is slower. Talking about a problem will always gather a crowd. It will always gather a crowd. It will have people on your side. It will have people who are like you around you. But investing in people's lives is what causes change. And the light that comes from a follower of Jesus doesn't end with the follower of Jesus. It points them on to Jesus. And at this time in history, when Paul is writing this is a very scandalous idea to the religious people. Because they had lived their lives. They had done everything they did so that others would look at them and celebrate them. They dressed a certain way. They hung out in certain areas. They talked in a certain way so that they would be honored. The idea was for you to see me and how amazing I am and honor me. And so the idea that it wasn't about them, that it was about something greater, was scandalous. First and foremost, before the rest of the world felt any scandalous ideas about Christianity, it was scandalous to the religious people. But it was even more scandalous than just being about something greater than themselves. It was scandalous because of this. Jesus invited his followers, both then and now, not to retreat from the world, but to engage with the world. Jesus comes out to these religious leaders and he says, hey, I'm inviting you not to retreat from the people around you who don't think like, look like, dress like, believe like, vote like you. I'm inviting you to engage with them. And we know this is the way that Jesus tells us to do this because in John 17, he's with his disciples, and this is just before he gets arrested and then taken and tried and crucified. He's with his disciples that night. He's teaching them about what's about to happen. He's telling them what's going to happen. And then when he's done, he prays this prayer for them. In John 17:15, he says, I'm not praying, this is Jesus praying about his followers. I'm not praying that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. And as you sent me into the world, I also have what? Sent. I also have sent them into the world. Listen, if we weren't supposed to engage with the lost world around us, this would not have been Jesus' prayer. Jesus' prayer is not take them out of the world, but Jesus' prayer is send them into the world just like I was sent. Which means for you and for me, if you are a Jesus follower, we are sent into the world to interact with the lost, with those who are living in sin, those who are people not like you and me, people who don't think like us, don't vote like us, don't dress like us, don't value what we value. We are to go and show people Jesus. And certainly people who are not followers of Jesus come here on Sundays. And they are welcome here. We always want them to be welcome. We want to point them to Jesus. We want people who don't believe in Jesus to come with questions. But the reality is the number of people that you're going to come in contact with this week who don't know Jesus is far greater than the number of people who are coming in here. Right? The number of people that you come in contact with, and even if it wasn't, your friends who don't know Jesus are not really inclined to come in here and hear somebody that they don't know tell them how they should live. Right? They're not inclined to come hear me tell them how to handle life differently. They need someone to invest in them because those without Jesus are not going to experience a changed life by just giving them a list of corrections to make. They're going to be changed by the power of the gospel. And most only want to hear it after they've seen it lived out. So this morning, I want to challenge you with a couple of things. Let's not waste our time by judging, by criticizing non-Christians for behaving like non-Christians. Paul says, that's really none of your business. Right? They haven't signed up for what you have signed up for. And I know, I get it. Listen, I get it. This is so hard because we think that we should. Shouldn't we be concerned about their behavior? That's a valid thing for us to think. Shouldn't we be concerned about their behavior? But the reality is, no, not really. We should be concerned about their salvation. That's what we should be concerned about. Because if all we want is for people to behave like us, if that's all we're going for is for people to behave like us, then we're really missing the point. We want them to know and follow Jesus. That is how their life will be changed. You know how I know that's true? Because that's true in my life. That's true in your life. You are changed. How you live is changed because of Jesus. Not because somebody told you that what you did was wrong. So we have to be around. We have to be involved. We need to be the type of person that others who are not followers of Jesus would say. I'm not sure about this whole Jesus thing, but I sure hope my daughter marries a Jesus follower, because they seem to be the kind of people I would want her to be married to. I'm not sure about Jesus. I don't know if that's for me, but I want to hire them because they're more honest than anybody else. Do you know how communities are won both in the New Testament and today? It's not because of preachers. And I'm all for preachers. It's good employment opportunity for me. I'm not anti-preacher. But they were won not because of people here on Sundays. They were won because of you. Because of followers of Jesus going and making disciples. Because of followers of Jesus investing in the lives of people instead of just talking about their sin. Because the reality is this: our reaction to their sin could affect their reaction to their sin. And if we're just out there pointing fingers and throwing stones, how can we ever expect them to come to a place of repentance and remorse? Again, this isn't acceptance of sin. This is prioritizing, introducing them to Jesus over changing their behavior. That's what this is about. Do I want to change their behavior, or do I want them to know Jesus? And this is so important because me, you, we were outsiders at one point. And there was a time that we didn't know Jesus. And at that point in our life, the last thing we needed was someone from a distance just shouting to us how wrong we are. We wanted someone investing in our lives and pointing us on to Jesus. You needed someone around you. I needed someone around me. People around you that showed us, that shows them this. We need to show people that Jesus is sweeter than their sin. I don't need to convince them to stop sinning. I need to show them that Jesus is better. That takes getting involved. That takes creating space in our life to get involved. And guess what? Just like it was a scandalous thought back then, it will be a scandalous thought today. To be seen with someone who didn't believe like they did will be scandalous for us as well. But it seems to me that Jesus taught this. He didn't just teach this, that Jesus modeled this. That we can, in fact, love people who aren't followers of Jesus to point them to Jesus. Because what's true in your life will be true in theirs, that Jesus changes everything. So we have to be reminded. Condemnation is not our job. Criticism isn't helpful. Staying away from them doesn't change anything. Jesus is the one who changes it all. If you bow your heads and close your eyes, we're going to pray together. God, we love you and thank you for who you are. And God, we thank you that you sent your son Jesus to walk towards us when we did not think like, look like, behave like, talk like, live our life like he did. God, may we take the model that Jesus showed and live it out in our lives. God, may we be more brokenhearted about someone not knowing you than we are upset that they don't do things the way we would want them to do them. And so I pray this week, if there's anyone here who doesn't know you now, that they would come talk to me or one of the other pastors or somebody in their community group or here in the church, and they would have a conversation about what it looks like to surrender their life to you. But I pray more than anything else that we would be a church that walks towards people who aren't like us, that we love them, that we are a light on a hill pointing them to you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.